In 860 AD, Constantinople stood as the jewel of the Byzantine Empire, a city of immense wealth, architectural splendor, and strategic importance. Its towering Theodosian walls had repelled countless sieges over a millennium, and its streets buzzed with merchants trading gold, silk, spices, and silver from across Europe and Asia. Yet, on a quiet June morning, the city faced a threat unlike any it had ever encountered. From the misty waters of the Bosporus, 200 Viking longships appeared, their dragon-headed prows slicing through the fog like harbingers of doom. On board were between 5,000 and 20,000 warriors from Kiev, known to the Byzantines as the Rus, led by the fearsome Ascold, the Thunder, and Deer, the Lightning. These were no ordinary raiders. They were Swedish Vikings who had conquered Slavic tribes along the Dnieper River, blending Norse martial skill with Slavic numbers and strategic cunning. Motivated initially by a trade dispute, Byzantine merchants had imposed heavy taxes and restricted Rus traders. The invaders were determined not merely to plunder, but to assert dominance over the wealthiest city in Europe. Emperor Michael III, notoriously negligent and reportedly drunk in Asia Minor at the time, had left Constantinople dangerously undermanned. The city's elite tagmata units were scattered across Anatolia. Its imperial fleet patrolled distant waters, and the massive chain blocking the Golden Horn harbor lay unguarded. As a result, the Rus fleet moved with near impunity, bypassing the heavily fortified European walls and targeting the less defended Asian suburbs. Villages were set ablaze, monasteries looted, and civilians massacred or enslaved. Theophilus, a local fisherman, was among the first to spot the approaching ships, and his frantic warnings rang through the city. Yet the speed and organization of the Viking assault left little time for preparation. Within hours, Constantinople's suburbs burned, and a terror-stricken population fled toward the safety of the walls. Despite the city's fearsome reputation, the psychological shock of sudden, precise, and ruthless attacks by a relatively small but highly disciplined force demonstrated a chilling truth. Even the greatest fortifications could not compensate for leadership failures, intelligence lapses, and underestimation of an enemy. The Vikings, armed with Danish axes, composite bows, and a cadre of berserkers, struck with terrifying efficiency, their synchronized attacks resembling war drums echoing across the Bosporus. Every raid seemed calculated to maximize both material gain and psychological impact, instilling panic, breaking morale, and sending a clear message to Constantinople. Wealth and invincibility were no longer synonymous. As the fires raged beyond the safety of the walls, the people of Constantinople struggled to comprehend how their invincible city had been brought to the brink of terror so suddenly. With Emperor Michael III still absent, leadership fell to the city's officials and, most importantly, to Photius, whose resolve became a pillar of stability amid chaos. Photius moved swiftly through the streets and churches, urging citizens not to surrender to despair, but to place their faith in divine protection. He organized constant prayers, processions, and vigils, carrying sacred relics along the towering ramparts, their golden surfaces reflecting the glow of distant fires. Yet beyond the spiritual reassurance, the physical reality remained grim. The Viking raiders, masters of mobility, refused to waste their strength on a direct assault against the impregnable land walls. Instead, they spread across the surrounding regions, striking vulnerable coastal settlements, monasteries, and islands in the Sea of Marmara. The Prince's Islands, once peaceful retreats for nobles and clergy, became scenes of horror as raiders descended without warning, looting treasures accumulated over centuries and dragging captives back to their ships. Survivors who escaped told of warriors who fought with terrifying calm, their discipline and coordination unlike the chaotic barbarian hordes Byzantine citizens had imagined. These men moved with purpose, their leaders directing operations with precision, ensuring maximum devastation with minimal losses. Inside the city, fear spread almost as quickly as the flames outside. Refugees crowded the gates, bringing stories of slaughter, enslavement, and destruction. Food supplies grew strained as thousands sought protection, and rumors flourished that the raiders were preparing some unknown method to breach the walls themselves. Parents kept their children close, and merchants hid their valuables, unsure if safety would hold. From the harbors, citizens could sometimes see the distant silhouettes of longships, their curved prows rising and falling with the waves like predators circling prey. The psychological pressure was immense, for the enemy did not need to enter the city to wound it. They had already struck at its pride, its confidence, and its sense of divine favor. Each day the invaders remained. Their presence whispered a dangerous truth. The empire's reach had limits. Meanwhile, messengers raced across land and sea to recall the emperor and his army. But time moved slowly for those trapped in uncertainty. Every sunrise brought dread of what might come next, and every sunset brought relief that, for another day, the walls still held. Beyond the immediate destruction, the leaders of the raiding force, Askold and Deer, observed their prey with calculated patience, fully aware that their greatest weapon was not brute force but control of time and fear. From their flagship, they studied the massive fortifications rising above the shoreline, recognizing that a direct assault would cost thousands of lives and likely fail. They had not come to destroy the city's walls. They had come to break its confidence and force its rulers to acknowledge their power. Their longships dominated the surrounding waters, moving swiftly between targets, vanishing and reappearing without warning. Using the currents of the Bosporus to their advantage, they struck coastal villages by day and withdrew by night, denying their enemy any clear opportunity for retaliation. Their warriors, hardened by years of river warfare along the trade routes connecting the Baltic to the Black Sea, showed remarkable discipline. These were not mere pirates driven by chaos, but experienced fighters who understood strategy, logistics, and psychological warfare. Their base of power in Kiev had grown wealthy through trade, and this expedition was as much a display of strength as it was an act of vengeance for perceived insults and restrictions imposed by Byzantine authorities. Each successful raid added to their confidence, and each unchallenged day reinforced the message that even the greatest empire could be humiliated. Yet despite their success, the raiders remained cautious. They knew the empire possessed powerful weapons, including the feared Greek fire, a substance capable of burning even on water, and they avoided provoking a naval confrontation that might turn the tide against them. Instead, they focused on isolating the city, cutting it off from its surroundings, and letting panic do their work for them. Within the walls, watchers could see the distant glow of burning settlements each night, a constant reminder of their helplessness. The invaders' horn sometimes echoed across the water, deep and haunting, carrying on the wind like a warning. For the citizens, the sound became a symbol of vulnerability, proof that their world had changed. For Askold and Deer, it was proof of something else entirely, that they had forced the mighty empire to watch, wait, and fear them, if only for a moment in history. Far from the burning suburbs, word of the crisis finally reached the absent ruler of the Byzantine Empire, and the urgency of the situation forced a rapid response. Emperor Michael and his commanders began the difficult journey back, gathering whatever forces they could along the way, though distance and time denied them the ability to immediately confront the raiders. Inside the city, however, another kind of defense was taking shape, one rooted not in steel but in belief. The great church of Hagia Sophia became the center of desperate hope, its vast interior filled day and night with citizens praying for deliverance. The golden mosaics shimmered in candlelight as voices rose together, echoing beneath the massive dome, creating a sound both mournful and defiant. Patriarch Photius urged the people to remain steadfast, reminding them that their city had endured countless trials before. Meanwhile, beyond the walls, the raiders continued their relentless pressure, pushing farther into the surrounding coastline of the Sea of Marmara, stripping the land of wealth and captives. Yet as the days stretched into weeks, signs began to emerge that their confidence was no longer absolute. The longer they remained, the greater the risk that imperial forces would return in strength, trapping them far from their northern homelands. Supplies had to be managed carefully, and their leaders knew that a single miscalculation could turn triumph into disaster. According to later accounts preserved by Byzantine writers, a dramatic moment came when sacred relics were carried to the shoreline and lowered into the waters in a solemn ritual, calling upon divine intervention. Soon after, a violent storm erupted without warning, churning the sea into chaos. Towering waves smashed against the longships, scattering them, damaging hulls and drowning warriors who had survived countless battles. Whether this storm was coincidence or divine answer, its effect was undeniable. For the first time since their arrival, the invaders faced something they could not control. Confusion spread among their ranks, and the careful order they had maintained began to fracture. From the city walls, citizens watched in awe as nature itself seemed to turn against their enemy. Fear, which had lived in Constantinople for weeks, now crossed the water and entered the hearts of those who had brought it. The balance had shifted, and both sides understood that the end of the siege was approaching, though none could yet know exactly how it would unfold. In the aftermath of the storm, the momentum that had once belonged entirely to the invaders began to fade, replaced by uncertainty and the growing realization that their moment of dominance was slipping away. The scattered longships regrouped cautiously, their commanders forced to reconsider how much longer they could safely remain so far from home. The warriors who had arrived with confidence now faced damaged vessels, lost comrades, and the constant threat of the returning imperial army. From the walls of Constantinople, observers noticed the subtle change. The enemy ships no longer moved with the same bold proximity, and their raids became less frequent, more cautious, as if testing whether their advantage still existed. Within the city, hope slowly returned, carried in whispers that the danger might soon pass. Refugees who had lost everything clung to rumors that the attackers were preparing to leave, while priests proclaimed that divine protection had prevailed. Yet the scars of the siege were everywhere. Smoke still rose from distant ruins, and families mourned those taken into slavery or killed in the sudden violence. Outside the walls, the raiders held councils among themselves, weighing pride against survival. They had achieved something remarkable. They had shaken the greatest city in the known world and exposed its vulnerability. They had seized wealth, captives, and glory. But they also understood the limits of their position. They could not hold the city, nor could they risk being trapped by the Empire's full military strength. Their mission, whether born of revenge, ambition, or opportunity, had reached its natural conclusion. In the final days, their departure came not with a final assault, but with a quiet withdrawal. One by one, the longships turned northward, their sails catching the wind as they slipped away across the water that had carried them to legend. From the walls, citizens watched in cautious disbelief, scarcely daring to accept that the nightmare was ending. There was no great battle to mark their victory, no triumphant charge. Instead, survival itself became the triumph. The Empire still stood. Its walls remained unbroken, and though its pride had been wounded, its existence endured. The invaders disappeared toward the horizon, leaving behind silence, devastation, and a story that would be told for generations. A reminder that even the strongest powers could be tested, and that endurance, as much as strength, defined true victory. In the months and years that followed, the memory of the siege lingered deeply within the consciousness of the Byzantine Empire, shaping its policies, its military planning, and its perception of the northern world. What had once seemed like distant, uncivilized lands were now recognized as the source of formidable and organized powers capable of striking at the very heart of imperial prestige. Within Constantinople, repairs began almost immediately. Burned suburbs were slowly rebuilt, walls were reinforced, and new defensive measures were put into place to ensure that such vulnerability would never again be so easily exploited. The empire strengthened its navy, recognizing that control of the sea was as vital as control of land. Watchposts were expanded, and intelligence networks were extended farther north, following the rivers that connected the Black Sea to the distant lands of the Rus. But alongside caution came adaptation. Rather than viewing the northern warriors solely as enemies, the empire began to see opportunity. These same men who had brought terror also possessed qualities the Byzantines respected: strength, loyalty, and unmatched skill in battle. In time, diplomacy replaced open hostility, and agreements were formed with the rulers of Kiev, opening trade routes and establishing fragile but meaningful trust. Out of this unlikely relationship emerged one of the most legendary military units in imperial history, the Varangian Guard. These warriors, many of them descendants of the very raiders who had once threatened the city, swore personal loyalty to the emperor and became his most trusted protectors. Their axes, once symbols of fear, became symbols of imperial authority. Emperors, including Basil I, relied on them not only for their fighting ability, but for their independence from the political intrigues that plagued the capital. For the citizens of Constantinople, the transformation was astonishing. Men who might have once stood beyond the walls as enemies now stood within the palace as guardians. Yet the memory of the siege was never forgotten. It became a lesson passed down through generations, a reminder that strength required vigilance, and that even the greatest